Welcome back to the Leadership Caffeine podcast. This is Art Petty, your host. I'm here with Dan Markovitz. Dan is the author of a really interesting, fascinating, helpful, and mercifully brief book, The Conclusion Trap, 4 Steps to Better Decisions. Dan, it's great to have you here.
Art, thank you so much for having me. I am really looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, same here as well. I enjoyed the book. It was a lot of fun. You know, any book that can cite Einstein, Pogo, Walt Kelly, Ishikawa, Ono, Kahneman and Tversky, and I'm probably missing a few, and reference the book, The Phantom Tollbooth, which I read to my kids a number of years ago, is good by me. So, that gives you just an indication of kind of the fun, but yet the practicality and utility of this book. So
I'm glad you picked up on the Phantom Tollbooth, because that's a book that I gave to all my nieces and nephews and all my friends who've got kids of about that age. I give them the Phantom Tollbooth. It is one of my favorites.
I love it. I absolutely love it. So, let's start kind of at the big picture, a framing question. What problem are you trying to help us solve with this book?
All right. So, I wrote this book primarily for business people, but certainly it's equally applicable to individuals. And the problem that I see over and over again is a tendency for us to leap to solutions or to conclusions, to jump to conclusions before we really understand the problem we're trying to solve. And that can have really catastrophic consequences for organizations and for individuals. Having survived several corporate reorganizations before I became a consultant, I saw that sort of thing go on all the time. Certainly, I see it in individuals, and I think we would be so well served, so much better served, if we could do a better job of really understanding the problem before we take any action at all.
Gosh, I love that, and it's interesting. The person's voice that I heard coming through your book that I don't think you referenced is I could hear Deming talking through your words. I don't know if I'm crazy in thinking that, but everything you referenced, Deming would love.
Absolutely. And Deming has been, I'd love to say he was a mentor of mine, but he died before I even heard of him. But absolutely, Deming is a huge influence on my work as a consultant in the lean continuous improvement arena, because truthfully, everything that I've said and spout and bloviate about, I think Deming said more concisely and more elegantly than I ever could.
You go to that issue that you do a nice job highlighting in the tendency of executives and managers to look at a situation, for example, declining sales, and say, aha, we've got to restructure. Deming would be quick, as you are in there, to say, that's just, you jump to that conclusion. And why is changing or adding new departments, or I think one of your examples was a FOG department in there, why will that solve the problem there? So I heard a lot of that coming through.
Absolutely. It's interesting in organizations, if you think about the people who get the plaudits, who get recognized, it's folks that raise their hands quickly and say, I know it. Let's do this. They're seen as insightful, as perspicacious. They're seen as aggressive, take charge, analytical whizzes. Mm-hmm. And seldom, speaking of Deming and the PDCA, the Plan, Do, Check, Act cycle, seldom do we go back and take a look at how that actually worked out, that change worked out. So the restructuring or the reorganization, do we actually look to see if it made a difference? Sometimes we'll say, gee, sales are still down, but we never go back to the decision we made a month or 6 months or a year or 18 months ago and say, hey, that thing we did where we went into the German market, or we reorganized, or we cut our prices, or we did whatever. Do we never go back and say, did that actually make the difference and make the improvement that we thought it would? And so we give people applause and credit and recognition for being aggressive,
right,
and acting quickly. But we never see whether it was the right action. And at the same time, no one wants to hear, especially if there's something negative going on, let's say declining sales or bad quality or whatever it happens to be. We never want to hear someone say, hey, before we do anything, could we stop? I'd like to take a week or two and really dive into this and understand what's happening. Let's just not do anything. No one does that, because it's somehow, it's politically.
It's political suicide, Dan.
Yes, it's political suicide. Exactly. You would never do that because you want to be seen as a take charge analytical superstar.
So much like, you described that tendency to go back, and I'm kind of now going down into the weeds a little bit. One of the things that I counsel my clients to do executive clients, is to maintain a decision journal. And the sole purpose of that journal, in addition to challenging them to think through how they framed the problem, what the assumptions were, data, facts, et cetera, different options, is that to go back to it and look at what happened with that decision so that they can strive to at least identify some of their tendencies, their biases, or what have you in the future. That has, those who follow through on that have found that incredibly helpful to strengthening as decision makers.
I've never actually thought about doing that. Now, I don't do the kind of leadership coaching that you do, but it makes so much sense because what you're doing is building in this reflection cycle, so it becomes a habit.
Yeah.
And if you say, if you're conscious about it and conscientious about it, you have an opportunity to spot those trends, the blind spots, the tendencies that are in your own decision making that could lead you to jump to conclusions that are unwarranted and unfounded.
So I'm probably not supposed to talk about businesses, but one large company in the Chicago suburban area, who I've had a number of MBA students in my courses have come through, at one point in time decided that it was a good idea to put a lot of satellites in geosynchronous orbit around the Earth.
Oh, yeah.
And they invested billions after billions after billions, and they would never come back and reevaluate that decision. And it was that classic, I guess, escalation of commitment and a few other baker's dozen of cognitive biases thrown into the process. But why does that stuff perpetuate so much in business? Why do we struggle so much with seeing the error of our way, standing up and saying, stop the madness. These decisions were wrong.
Yeah, that is a fascinating question. And I think, as I wrote about in the book, I think there are a few factors here. One is training. We get trained from the time we're in kindergarten or elementary school anyway to raise our hands and just jump and come out with an answer, because that gives you class participation points. I can tell you that having gone to a very, very good business school, the pattern holds true. There we are, 27, 28, 29, 30 years old. And the kids, the students that are raising their hands first, they open the case and they're seen by professors as being the real sharp people. I think in the business world, as I mentioned earlier, we have a tendency to celebrate those who are fast to move. Mm-hmm. And then I think also there's the very real issue of time pressure. All of us are dealing with meetings out the eyeballs. We got emails all over the place. We got fires burning. And so if we can just get one thing off of our plate, just one thing, and give ourselves a little bit of a break, mm-hmm. I think that pushes us to just make a decision just so I can move on to whatever the next thing is.
Well said. I agree. Now let's come back to that jumping to conclusions propensity. And again, you're much more the expert than I am in this area, but isn't it kind of a function of the fact that we really like patterns? Our brains look at situations and we see things that we think are similar to something else. And instead of doing the deep analysis and slowing down, we just tend to see that pattern and go and jump.
Absolutely. That I think ties into the whole heuristic of what Kahneman and Tversky talked about with system thinking. There's a pattern that looks really similar, right, or somewhat similar, or even just a little bit similar to what I've seen before. Let me go in that direction. Nicholas Taleb, the Black Swan author, wrote something, and I'm going to butcher the quote, but essentially said that when we are faced with imperfect and incomplete information, we leap to commoditized ideas. And he didn't mean that in like commoditized ideas, like something you buy out of a business book or from a bookshop store, but the idea of, let me come up with something that's simple, that is a concept that I can apply it and go, oh yeah, it's a Porter 5 forces. it's a BCG 2x2 matrix. I'll just go. Right. Because it's easy and it's simple, and it gives us a sense of security that, I'm on top of it, because it must work, because it's worked with other places at other times. And that's easier than doing the hard work of stopping and thinking and evaluating everything anew.
Right.
And I think it's the human condition in
sure,
general.
sure.
And in
So
business.
we're fighting ourselves in some regards, fighting our natural tendencies. So I'd like to read a quote from your book. It was earlier in the book, and it kind of really frames things out. You say, wrong decisions are okay. Wrong decisions are the price of doing business, of being human. What's not okay are rash decisions based on insufficient effort to understand the real problem. What's not okay is jumping to conclusions and implementing solutions that jeopardize your organization and the lives of the people that work there. What's not okay is the undisciplined or non-existent analysis visible in the ready, fire, aim, exclamation point habit that so many leaders have. Oh my gosh, I love that passage.
So glad you picked that photo. I'm so glad. I was so proud of writing that, honestly.
That's great. It's classic.
Because really, I mean, there is no such thing. You can't make a perfect decision. None of us are the Oracle of Delphi. We don't have visibility into the future. We all labor in conditions of imperfect information, which is fine.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to screw up. That's okay. It's the stupid stuff that we can avoid, the stupid mistakes, the leaping to solutions. That's the real crime, because people get hurt. People lose their jobs.
Oh gosh, yeah.
People suffer when those decisions are made rashly. Not often, not always the people at the top of an organization, but people farther down lose their jobs.
Yeah, not all that recent in actual calendar time, but fresh in my mind was a scenario in post 9/11 where our software company had to decide what to do. We were on our way to New York City to sell the company on 9/11. And we're derailed all over the country, and we reassembled, said everything changed. That deal fell through. Nobody sold anything for months. What was going to be a part stock deal, and it dissipated. And we realized that one thing was going to happen for sure. Nobody was going to buy. The second thing, nobody in our competitive space was going to do a lot of investing. They were going to hunker down. That was the natural human tendency.
Sure.
So we faced this dilemma. We had a good vision. We had some brilliant technologists. If we put in effectively bet the company type of investment, we might come out of the situation winning with an advantage, a 12 to 18 month advantage with our competitors, and own the day. So we made that decision to go ahead, and again, it's probably a case study in decision making. But the thing I remember the most about it, Dan, was losing sleep night after night after night over the 400 families that were going to be affected if we screwed that decision or situation up. And it was close, but as it turned out, we ultimately got it right thanks to the heroics of some remarkable people, and the company skyrocketed and we sold it to SAP, and the rest is history. But remembering what was going to happen to the people downstream, the executives were going to be fine. A little bit of the inequity in the system, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wonder, as you say that, it makes me wonder if that alone, that consideration of the families and the individuals whose lives or livelihoods are at stake, I wonder if that alone would be enough of a break, of a check to help people avoid jumping to solutions. I haven't thought through that, but it just occurs to me, if you really do feel deeply the burdens of leadership, the responsibility of taking care of these people who have decided to invest their lives with your company, it seems to me that it would make you a little less cavalier about making a decision that could have huge ramifications for the company.
I like the way you state that. I haven't thought about it in those terms either, but I know it was a key driver. I mean, we stared at each other a lot, and then we engaged with the people to find out how they were doing, because it was just, again, wonderful people we really cared for in a relatively small community trying to do something remarkable. And these jobs, if they went away, they weren't going to replace them in that community. Now, to this day, there's a gigantic office of that software company in an unlikely place on the banks of the Mississippi River because that decision turned out to be okay.
Yeah.
But it was scary. It was scary in the process.
I can totally appreciate that. Bob Chapman, who's the CEO of a company called Barry Waymiller, they make capital equipment.
Okay.
He's really, really remarkable guy. They have, and he talks about leadership all the time. He is a guy who has embraced the core principles of lean production, lean manufacturing. Sure. he probably wouldn't be able to identify a lean production line from a non-lean production line if it hit him in the face. But he appreciates the respect for humanity and the commitment to the workers. Some people might say he's paternalistic, but he says, listen, we are stewards of these people's lives. The people who will come to work here every single day, it's our responsibility to, one, send them home safely every single day. And it's our responsibility to make their lives better by providing them meaningful, substantial employment and not be crazy, take crazy risks with their work. The results they've gotten have been just unbelievable. It's really something. But as we talk about this, I think about him, and you talk about those 400 families that were dependent upon you. Bob is that kind of guy where he would think very seriously, if we do this, what is it going to mean to the folks that are working in this plant and to their families and to their communities?
That feels, it feels right for this era, that type of leadership approach. I mean, I'm not sure. I've been writing recently. I actually write to try to figure things out. Some people read stuff assuming that you figured everything out. I write to try to figure things out. So, and I've been writing about something I'm calling resilient leadership, which means different things to different people. But it seems like that notion of focusing on the impact of the individuals, of the real stakeholders, not the customers and not the board, but those people doing the work, seemed right for this world. And I was thinking about it. I grew up working for a fabulous global company, one I'm thrilled to name, and that is Matsushita, better known as Panasonic. And one of the first things that happened to me when we joined that company, and my first trip to Japan, is we received a classroom session on the basic business principles of Konosuke Matsushita. And although I can't, if you held a gun to my head, I couldn't get all of them. There were a couple that jumped out at me. The one which, though, was the most significant was, profits are society's reward for doing a good job, effectively for making the situation better for all. And that became a really critical component of decision-making as we looked at growing the unit that we were a part of and so forth and so on. So I'm kind of wondering if I'm connecting the dots in my own life. Thanks for the psychology shrink time here. You can send me the bill, okay?
Hold on, let me get a couch for the rest of the interview.
Exactly.
Lay you down. That would make things a little bit better. I'll get a pipe.
It is interesting how we develop as decision makers, though. And so help us understand. You have, a nice catchy title, 4 Steps to Better Decisions, without giving away the book, because I do recommend that people buy the book in droves and use it and adopt it and talk about it and think about it at a high level. What are the 4 steps?
Well, let me, I'll preface that by first making myself look smart by blowing on my glasses and cleaning them.
Very professorial, so yes.
Exactly. It makes me look a little more academic, professorial, and smart. So the first step is to go and see, to actually see what's happening. There is a TV show, a reality TV show, which you may or may not be familiar with, called Undercover Boss.
Yeah, sure.
The premise, of course, is that the CEO goes to pick up garbage cans or work on the factory line or do some sort of scut work job. And of course, no one knows who he is. And my hunch is that if people don't recognize you, there's a good chance that you're not going and seeing what's actually happening very often. That's a really bad sign. Okay, it's probably hyped up for reality TV, but still, you do see a tendency for people, especially leaders, to sequester themselves in their offices or the conference rooms, and they talk about what's happening someplace. This is what's happening in the call center. Or we see that there's errors in the customer service area, the customer service department, when they enter orders, they're making mistakes, whatever. Let's try to figure it out. And I would argue that until you go and see what's actually happening, you can't really make any intelligent decision because you don't understand the situation. You may have some data. You've got spreadsheets and reports that say errors are up or net promoter score is down, or defects, first pass yield on a production line is 2% lower than it should be. But until you see what's happening, you can't really understand the problem. You have a 2-dimensional view of a 3-dimensional situation.
Did you ever wonder, because I wonder about these weird things, how many strategies have been conceived in boardrooms without customers being observed or talked to? How many? My argument would be most of them.
I would argue anytime you have the executive team on a 3-day retreat with trust balls at a golf resort, you're probably right there going down the wrong path.
I've been in some of those meetings, Dan.
Oh yeah. So anyway, the first idea is to go and see, so that you really get a full, well-rounded, 3-dimensional picture of what's happening.
Right.
The second idea is framing the problem appropriately. And I think that we fall into a variety of traps, which I won't go into here for obvious reasons, but we fall into a variety of traps when we try to frame a problem. So we'll say things like, the problem is we don't have enough of this, or we lack that. Mm-hmm. And by definition, that is not actually a problem. That is a solution that we cleverly masquerade as a problem, because the only solution to we don't have the right software, or I don't have a sales manager I can trust, is to buy the right software or to hire a new sales manager. And so if you're boxing yourself into an intellectual corner, a cul-de-sac, mm-hmm. you're really saying is, my solution is hiring a new sales manager. My solution is getting a new app. My solution is opening up a new factory, or whatever it happens to be. And so we don't frame the problem well. We often put our solution into the problem statement, and as a result, we're led inexorably to this one decision.
Yeah, right.
May or may not be right. So we've really jumped to the solution, but we're not telling ourselves that, because we're being clever and saying the problem is that whatever. So that's the second step. Mm-hmm. The third step is, I call it thinking backwards. A lot of people might call it brainstorming. It's essentially, you'd mentioned Ishikawa diagram. So it's a fishbone diagram, or it could be a cause map, which a lot of people use. Mm-hmm. The idea is to start to brainstorm about why we're seeing these visible symptoms of a problem. We still don't understand the root causes of the problem, but we're trying to understand the visible symptoms. Mm-hmm. And so what we do is start to categorize things. Is it the equipment? Is it the environment? Is it the process? Is it the regulations? We can categorize it in any one of an infinite number of ways, but the idea is to give people a framework to start thinking about what are the factors that are driving this dysfunction that we're seeing. Mm-hmm. And so we want people, instead of just stopping at the symptom, to start thinking, what's behind the symptom? What are the factors that are contributing to the symptom? And then the last step, so now, of course, we've gone to see, we've framed the problem, we've thought backwards. And now the last step comes straight out of the Lean playbook and Dr. Deming. It's asking why. And so trying to dive deep to understand what is the root cause for any one of these factors that's creating the problem that we see. So it's called 5 whys often in the Lean playbook. Yeah. It really could be 3 whys. It could be 11 whys. We don't really know.
It gets annoying after 5.
It sure does get annoying after 5. And if you have a 2-year-old, you understand this, or a 5-year-old, you understand this. But what I think is really important here is that it forces us to go past the easy answers that we usually come up with, like Sarah screwed up. Mm-hmm. One of the rules that I preach all the time is that your 5 why can't end with, it was Art's fault. That's not an answer, because there's an environment, there's a system that enabled you to make that mistake. So what is it about the environment, about the instructions, about the training, about the situation, about the tools, whatever it is, that has caused you or has put you in a position where you could make a human error?
And that's classic Deming and an offshoot of the red bead experiment, right? I mean, it's the system. Yeah.
It's the system, absolutely. And so we want to say, no, you can never stop with an individual. Right. And the other thing the other rule that I'd like to keep in mind is you can't stop with, well, they didn't follow the procedure. Because Lord knows companies are awash in procedures and documents. But we are human beings. Sometimes we're not going to follow the procedure.
Sure.
Why? It's not because people are lazy. It's not because they don't care. There's something else going on. And so we want to be able to dig deeper. And if we do those whys, we go through this 4-step process, we're going to start to understand what's really behind the symptoms or the problem that we see. Mm-hmm. Once we're there, now we can start coming up with countermeasures for the problem that we're trying to address.
So I love the way you've you simplify what can be a complex, convoluted process. Is any one of those steps any more important than the other?
Boy, that's a good question. I think that if I had to prioritize, I would probably put going and seeing first.
Okay.
Which happens to be first in the cycle as well. But I think there's so much that we don't appreciate or can't appreciate without seeing the people, without seeing the environment, without seeing the tools. And I think, and we tend to, without the visual connection, even if it's via Zoom or Skype or something.
Sure. Yeah, right.
Without that connection, I think we tend to lose sight of the essential humanity of the people that are really trying hard to do a good job for us. And so we end up saying, well, orders are down. Someone screwed up. And so I think I would probably put the primary emphasis on.
I was having a tug of war between that and the framing one, but I agree. I don't think you can get to great framing until you've done that. And thinking back to experiences, I had a good occasion earlier in my technology career to work with the folks at Jeffrey Moore's Chasm Group at the time. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I know Jeffrey Moore is still there. I'm not sure if the Chasm Group really was a big fan. And one of their key issues to kick off any initiative was a day in the life, which, we would send our teams far and wide to observe targeted users or current customers and look at it. It wasn't until many years later, however, that I saw it applied in an absolutely brilliant way. It's a company in a declining industry, just getting nowhere, couldn't come up with an idea to stimulate sales to save their lives. And the industry is readily dying. And so they sent out one individual who had also been through that same process. And he didn't ask his customers anything. He just observed in his mind a day in the life of data, since it had a data-oriented company. Yeah. And what he uncovered was an incredible amount of inefficiencies that could be solved with, services and with technology and a blend of that. It had ended up being the, big revenue driver and profit driver. And in a million years, I don't think the customers ever could have said what we need is this blend of technology and services to solve these problems, because they didn't really see those problems, and at least in totality.
That story and your story about the day in the life from the Chasm Group, it makes me think that it just clicked for me that what so many companies do now is they outsource that going and seeing to IDEO.
Yeah,
and all the design thinking consultancies. Yeah. And I'm not saying this to diminish or disparage the work that those consultancies do. And yes, they are highly trained and they bring all kinds of skills to the table, which people may not have in a company. And I totally get that. So with that caveat, imagine what would happen if the CEO or the head of marketing or the head of sales or whatever, if they just spent a day with customers. I mean, you may still need IDEO, but it occurs to me that they would have the opportunity to experience that, to do the design thinking with, themselves. And maybe it's not a customer. Maybe you hire IDEO for the outside consumer stuff. But how about internally? Let's go spend a day with the guys, with the pickers and packers in the warehouse, and see what their life is like. Let's go spend a day with the guy who drives the truck for us, or whatever it is. A day with the janitor.
So well said. And part of that isn't just talking with them. It's in my opinion, trying to find out what problems are renting space in their minds. What are they worried about? What are they losing sleep about at night? Because those were some of the insights that can come into, versus saying, hey, what do you think of our product and what features or functions would you like to add to it? Which plays kind of into the classic innovator's dilemma.
Yeah. And as you point out, I think a lot of people wouldn't be able to articulate it, because they have spent their days or their lives compensating and working around the problem. If you're spending a half a day with the janitor, he may not be able to tell you, it's a real pain in my butt when I run out of cleaning supplies, or there's only one mop, or the mop is too small. But if you actually get to see it, see the workaround, this guy's walking back and forth down the hall to this one sink at one end of the building, and he's got a really small mop and he has to do it 17 times, you would catch that the janitor himself doing the job might not see that.
Right,
Because
right.
that's just life. And he's been working around it.
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt. So your brilliant second step on framing the problem, my experience is that's something that's just underinvested in terms of timing and approach. I think we should be teaching that starting in kindergarten with our children, how to frame situations.
Totally agree. Yeah, that's something that is a skill that I think we tend not, we don't practice, we don't learn.
Right.
And so we come up with one frame for a problem and we're done. One thing that I've been doing recently with my clients and with some virtual workshops that I've been running has worked really well, is that I've given people a problem, an existing problem that everyone knows about. For example, let's say the war on drugs or the opioid crisis, whatever. And I say, come up with 3 or 4 other ways to frame the problem.
Right.
And what are the ramifications? And then after we practice that, I say, now, what problem do you guys have at your company, your organization, whatever it is?
Right.
Now, just frame it however you want. I don't really care. But now come up with 4 more frames and see what that does.
I love that.
And I think about it as kind of like setting sail. Lord knows I'm not a sailor. My wife and I are Jewish, and she likes to say, we're a desert people. We don't get in our boats. I get so violently seasick. You're talking about a guy who got seasick
That's
on
funny.
Hell, we didn't even sail across the Red Sea. We're like
You parted it, yeah.
Parted.
Way
But
to
anyway,
go.
if you're setting sail, and there's a small degree of difference in the first, 100 yards, the first half a mile, it doesn't matter that much. But even 1 degree of difference, by the time you're hours out, you could be, or days out, you'd be in vastly different places.
Right.
And so I think even the subtleties in problem framing can lead to vastly different outcomes and different focuses and different countermeasures if you're not really careful about the way you frame the problem. And that's not to say this is good, this one is good, and this one is bad, but rather being cognizant of the fact that framing is really, really important. And we are going to end up in a vastly different place if we're not careful about the words we choose and the frame around which we put the problem.
Great tie-in to the sailing. So, and if I may, I interviewed a gentleman who just authored a fascinating book, Thomas Weddell Weddelsborg, and it's called "What's Your Problem?" And I forget the subtitle of it, but effectively, it's an entire book about framing.
Okay. Wow.
I recommend it as a complement to your book for management teams that are going to be working through that process. What a great addition to step number 2. Thomas spends a lot of time helping us develop techniques and tools to frame. And I'll include that in the show notes as well.
Yeah, I'll have to look that up. That sounds terrific.
Really, really a great concept. He starts out with one, and I think we've probably all heard it, but the classic, the slow elevator dilemma.
Yes.
Yeah, tenants complain to the building management that the elevators are too slow, or clients in a hotel property complain that they're too slow. So what are your options here, right? The classic, speed up the elevators, may not be possible. Replace the elevators, really implausible. Or let's make the wait seem slower or shorter. Yeah, which is the reframe. Put mirrors or televisions or something to that effect.
Right.
Nice example to jumpstart reframing thinking.
Absolutely. And that, of course, is not to say that that's the right frame. It's
Sure.
a different frame. So we could make it feel slower or feel shorter, but maybe we want to say, you know what, we don't want to make it feel shorter. The fact is that we are a much busier hotel than we used to be.
Right.
We need to invest in the new systems where the elevators are more controlled in advance, and I've seen these in New York now where you tell the elevators what floor you want to go to and says, go to elevator C or elevator A or whatever.
Okay.
It's really interesting. I don't know how the technology works, but clearly the software is figuring out with all the other people that are trying to get on board how to allocate the elevators.
How to optimize. Yeah. Interesting.
So that's another approach. Again, not that the mirrors are a bad solution. It's a different solution.
Sure. I think it's also a very old solution before software and artificial intelligence started entering the equation. I believe that example goes back quite a few years to the beginning of elevators. So,
right. Fair. It may be time to update that.
So suppose my question is, if we follow the steps, I looked for the guarantee in your book that said we're going to start making better decisions, and I couldn't find it.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
I was thinking, boy, wouldn't I be some sort of big smarty pants if I could come up with a guarantee that you're going to make better decisions? And I realized I couldn't. And going back to something you had said earlier, there's nothing wrong. Decisions will turn out wrong sometimes.
Sure.
And I think that what I'm trying to do is not provide solutions, canned or otherwise, to people, but rather my goal is to just stop them from leaping to a solution that will almost certainly be suboptimal at best and harmful at worst. So once you do understand the problem, once you really understand the situation you're grappling with, then you can start to figure out,
right,
well, what's my solution? Mm-hmm. And I have no idea. One, every problem, of course, is unique and idiosyncratic. And it's unlikely that a solution can be copy pasted into mm-hmm. new environment. Also, I'm just not that smart. But I do think that what I can say is that you could use these steps mm-hmm. in any situation to slow yourself down from avoiding what Kahneman and Tversky called the system one thinking, to slow yourself down and push you into system two, so that you have a much higher likelihood of being able to come up with a solution that really does work.
That's just so much more work, though, Dan.
Yeah, it sure is. It sure is. And again, I'm not naive. Even though I've been a consultant for, 15, 17 years or something, I remember what it's like being in a company. And right. There you are, you're in a meeting with the CEO, with the VP of whatever, and no one really is looking forward to you saying, I don't know the answer to that, but could I have a week to really dig into the problem? Mm-hmm. It's a lot of work and it's hard. You need to have an environment that is a safe environment. Mm-hmm. Amy Edmondson from Harvard has actually talked about this, the yes. psychological safety. You really need that to be, and you want to encourage that in your organization so that people do feel safe to say, let's hold on a sec. Before we take these steps, let's just make sure that we really understand the problem we're trying to solve.
I think that may be the most powerful piece of advice in the entire, of many great pieces of advice. Hold on a second. Let's just make certain, what the problem is we're trying to solve here. I love that. Absolutely love it. So I'm a big fan of books coming to life in actions, ideas to actions. My belief is that this is a book that management teams should consume, product teams should consume it, development teams, project teams. This just fits our world today. And it's a mercifully short book. I think the version I read, 77 pages. Thank you, by the way. So what do you want? What do you want all of these teams and managers to do? If they've got the book, they read the book, what do you want them to do to begin changing their cultures and improving, or at least eliminating some of the risks of those big bad errors out there?
I guess the first thing I'd like them to do is write a review on Amazon for our overlords in Seattle, right? 5 stars. Stars are free, just so you know.
5 stars, yeah, right.
Feel free to use them recklessly. No, what I would really like them to do, I think, is to take a problem they're grappling with right now. Because in any organization, at any time, there's some problem. It mm-hmm. could be something that is existential in nature. Are we going to survive? Right. It could be something much smaller. Should we use blue or red this season? And what I'd like them to do is start to experiment with this idea mm-hmm. of going and seeing, of reframing the problem, of trying to understand the root causes or organize their thinking, and then going 5 whys to understand what some of the real root cause is behind those things. And I think that, and I would love to see them use it as a team mm-hmm. so that people start to get comfortable with it. Because I think if one person tried to do this, as I mentioned earlier, I think unless you have a super safe, comfortable, psychologically safe, comfortable environment, I think people would be hesitant or a little anxious about saying, hold on a sec. But if they could do it as a team, as a group, I think that it would give them the security to give it a try.
I agree. It seems to be a natural, great group product, be it a management team or a product team or what have you. So,
and then I think, going back to something you mentioned about the decision journal that you recommend your leaders, your clients work with, to be able to put that up on the wall and say, let's revisit this in a week, in 2 weeks, in a month, and see, one, how we felt about the process, and 2, how did it actually turn out?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that gradually we might see a change in a movement, a shift away from this tendency to jump to solutions and a movement towards more thoughtful, considered decision making. That's the hope.
It's fabulous guidance. I love it. Two comments. A number of years ago, I talked with a person who will be nameless. I like the guy. I respect the guy a great deal. He happens to be a professor as well at a well-known graduate school. And I asked him, he's a marketing professor. I said, when do you take the time to teach people about how to make decisions? And he kind of looked at me and said, I don't. It's not what I do. And I walked away as kind of the practical corporate business type thinking, but that would be the most important thing that you could do. And then I think about the broader curriculum, and we don't necessarily single out decision-making and strengthening as decision makers. Everything's implied that we're going to study our accounting and our finance and our economics and management and leadership and what have you. But at the end of the day, this decision-making process is messy and muddy.
You know, when I was in business school, and again, I went to a top business school.
Sure.
We had one decision-making class. We called it trees because it was a decision tree. So they showed us essentially how to calculate the net present value of each branch of the decision tree. Yes, no, left, right, high, low. And then you roll it back and you find out which one provides you with the highest NPV. And that is, and I haven't actually thought about that class since this conversation right now, but in hindsight, that is, with all due respect to the university, the shallowest,
oh my gosh, yes,
most arbitrary and frankly arrogant way of thinking about decision making, as though you actually know what the net present value is and what the percentage likelihood is of it turning out well or poorly. That's insane. There's nothing there about problem framing. There's nothing there about seeing the actual conditions and environment and understanding things. And that's crazy. They never taught it to us. Our professors never taught us how to make a decision except to say, here's the decision tree and choose the one with the highest.
And it's reflected in kind of that perspective, you know, and I grew up leading marketing teams my whole career. I can't imagine anything more important than trying to figure out how to make better marketing decisions.
Yeah.
In you know, at least in that sense. So, well, I'm hoping that your fabulous book, The Conclusion Trap, 4 Steps to Better Decisions, and you and all of your efforts can maybe help us do a better job of that and make this something that's much more of a muscle that we regularly develop. I just don't think we spend enough time working on decision-making skills.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think we should look at this as a trip to the cognitive gym.
Yeah. I love that.
It's not something that we're going to do well today or tomorrow or next week. The skills are rusty at best, atrophied at worst, or perhaps even non-existent. And so we need to start learning them. And I think practice with small things, practice with medium-sized things, work our way up, I think is a way to become better at it.
By the way, dibs on the article title, A Decision-Making Trip to the Cognitive Gym, or something to that effect. I'll give you attribution though, okay?
Please do. I'll tweet it for you.
So Dan, it's a great book, a great resource. I don't say that lightly. I highly recommend it. I really care about this process of decision-making. One final question. What did you learn in the process of writing this book?
That is an excellent question. I learned a couple of things. First, I learned how enraged I am by the poor decisions being made. And again, going back to your stories about the 400 families that were dependent on yours, I think about the damage that's been done to so many people. I know that I had been laid off twice in my career because of, I think, really bad decisions. And I don't say that just because I got laid off and I wasn't the only one. But I think the first was recognizing how deeply personal and emotional this topic is.
Yes.
The second thing I took away from this was that we are not slaves to our system one thinking. Again, Kahneman talks about this, and he talks about how it's system two with this deeply thoughtful analytical approach is time consuming and labor intensive. But what we can do, what I realize is that if we give people a framework 4 steps, could be 2 steps, could be 6,
Sure.
whatever framework you want, that it's not that hard to break out of our tendency, our human tendency,
Mm-hmm.
to go rely upon system 1 thinking and make poor decisions.
Mm-hmm.
So this is my attempt. And again, I'm not arrogant enough to think that I've written the final word on this, but to think rather, whatever approach you want to take, if you want to leave out a step, leave out a step, but to take ownership
Mm-hmm.
of our cognitive biases and our human tendencies and say, no, I'm not going to go down this road. I'm going to think a little more deeply. That was really powerful for me, to realize that we have that ability to save ourselves.
I can't think of a better cause, and I can't think of a better way to wrap up the interview. It was an honor. Thank you so much for spending time, and thanks for the conclusion trap.
Art, the pleasure is mine. It was a real honor to be with you, and thanks for having me.
My pleasure.